It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster.
Yes, 70. No, 56. There was one abstention. The motion is therefore agreed.
Scotland follows England and Wales and takes the first step towards assisted dying. But there's opposition from doctors.
After extensive consultation and consideration, we've concluded that we just cannot support this bill.
Should some of the billions that were to be spent on HS2 be spent on a new Liverpool to Manchester rail link?
I'm Tanya. I'm from Dubai.
My name is Sanjana. I'm from India.
My name is Nixon. I'm from Singapore.
My name is Ling. I'm from China.
The government hopes thousands fewer international students will come to the UK. How will universities cope without their money? All that and, of course, Prime Minister's questions. We'll bring you that live at noon. Joining us today, Labour MP Sarah Coombs, Conservative peer Mark Harper, Ava Santina Evans from Politics Joe and Conservative commentator Albi Amankona. This is Politics Live. Hello and welcome. Let's start with the assisted dying bill, because if you look at this headline here, GPs are split over assisted dying plans, BBC research suggests. Family doctors in England are deeply divided on the issue of assisted dying. The research from the BBC looks at plans to legalise the practice. More than 1,000 GPs replied, with about 500 telling the BBC they were against an assisted dying law and about 400 saying they were in favour. Now, separately, as you heard also in the headlines, the president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists spoke to BBC's Newsnight yesterday. She said the organisation is neutral on the principle of assisted dying, but has concerns about the bill in its current form and wants to see more safeguards. Let's take a look.
We know that mental disorders can be treated. Most of them are very treatable. When a person has cancer, and unfortunately they are then told that their cancer is now terminal, that diagnosis is often associated with the development of a depressive disorder. Now, depressive disorders are associated with suicidality. People feel like ending their lives. But when you treat that depression, that wish to end their life goes. So there's there needs to be a requirement to assess whether or not a person who's wishing to end their life has actually got a mental disorder that could be treated.
Sarah, starting with you, do you think, or how much influence do you think that could have on MPs in terms of changing their minds or not?
I think it's a really big emotional issue for MPs, and for lots of us newbies, you know, it was a big deal to have that vote in November and to have these votes upcoming. And I think we all have to listen to the experts across the sectors, and obviously there are really mixed opinions. For my own case, you know, I voted in favour of it at second reading, and that was because I think people now are dying really painful, traumatic deaths in some instances. And the question for me is, should they be able to choose the time and the kind of way of their death? And I have a particular constituent called James, whose wife Helen had a degenerative lung condition, and she wanted to live. He told me she wanted to live, but there was no doctor in the world that could have done anything for her, and she basically would have suffocated to death. And they decided in the end that she would prefer to end her life on her own terms. They went to Dignitas in Switzerland, but while they were there, their house in West Bromwich was broken into, and the police came round and their neighbour said, oh, they're not here, they've gone to Switzerland. And so when James came back with the love of his life, Helen, having died peacefully, he got investigated by the police for 6 months, and that was horrendous for him. And it's cases like that which had made me think that I think the principle here needs to be a change in the law.
I mean, that is a pretty heartbreaking, I suppose, in many ways, story. Does it persuade you in any way to rethink your view on assisted dying in the bill?
Well, I think I've reached my view, which is that I'm opposed both in principle and to the bill for similar reasons than Sarah, from my own experience. So one of the things I did, I was the Minister for Disabled People, and it's very interesting that there's not a single organisation representing disabled people that supports this bill. For many disabled people, they think the principle of this bill, it fundamentally changes how you view and value human life, and they think it's a very bad step that you can't reverse. And so I think, but even for people that support the principle of the bill, this particular bill, I think is very badly drafted. It had some safeguards in at the beginning, the High Court process, which have been stripped out. Interestingly, in the package you just had, one of the key safeguards that Kim Leadbeater said is this panel with a psychiatrist. The Royal College has now withdrawn its support for the bill and says in its current form, without significant safeguards, and during the committee process, they chucked out, they didn't put a single safeguard that some of my colleagues tried to put into the bill. They don't support it, and that's very significant. So my own view is I hope that MPs look again, and even if they support the principle, they recognise that this bill isn't fit for purpose and vote it down. And then if the government supports it, the government should come back with a government bill, still a free vote, but do the job properly.
How big a problem could this be, this intervention or announcement by the Royal College of Psychiatrists, particularly, as Mark is saying, because the psychiatrists would be on the expert panel to assist assisted dying cases?
I don't know how much effect it will really have. I think that a lot of MPs have made a decision, and those who are against the bill are not going to be persuaded either way. I mean, I would disagree with Mark. I actually think there are too many safeguards in this bill. I think that possibly this sort of legislation should be looking after people who are in chronic pain, who might not know the date at which they will pass, but they could live 10, 20, 30 years in chronic and excruciating pain. And perhaps this is the sort of bill that could alleviate to them, or that could help them. But then
That's exactly why disabled people are terrified by this bill.
Well, no,
they
yes.
think this is a step to people who have to manage with conditions that we would find very challenging, who think that people will decide that it's better for the world if they're not in it. And that is
that's where I was going
that they're terrified
to agree
about.
with you, is that what should actually be fixed before we look at this sort of legislation is actually hospice care and end-of-life care. And I worry that some people may choose to take their own life because they cannot afford to live anymore. And I think that's a dire situation.
And on that, I agree with you. I think what we should be focused on is hospice care and helping people have a good death, and also helping people to live well. And I think actually that's where the focus of politics and the government and resources should be focused, rather than making it easier for people to die. And look, cases that Sarah set out, I absolutely understand that. That's why this is a tough issue. But the danger is if you give extra rights to some people, but that's at the cost of vulnerable and disabled people their lives being made more vulnerable, I think that's a price that's not worth paying.
But they are rather vulnerable as well, with the PIP payments being taken away from them, aren't they? So they're already in a pretty dire situation.
Yes, well,
there's sort of like there's a domino effect, actually.
Well, that's one of the things I think the government and Labour MPs need to worry about, which is there's a danger with this legislation and the cut to the PIP payments, which is clearly being driven by the Treasury, that the danger is they'll get a reputation for really not caring about disabled people.
Sarah, are you worried about that since that's been raised?
Look, I think it's a completely separate issue from assisted dying, which is about terminal illness. You have to have a diagnosis. But
as a point, are you worried about cuts to personal independence payments?
I completely understand that disabled people and people who are on benefits, when we start talking about reform nationally, it's always a concerning moment. But I think the welfare system that we inherited from the Tories is broken. I think that everyone agrees with that, and we need to fix it. We need to do that really carefully. We need to protect disabled people, absolutely. People who can never work should be protected, and we are doing that. But I understand this is a difficult issue, and this is why the government's got to consult carefully going forward.
Albie, where are you on assisted dying in principle first? And then let's talk about the interventions and whether they're a problem or could be problematic in terms of implementation.
In principle, I support assisted dying. Absolutely, I support assisted dying because of personal things that I've been through in my own family, people I know. I think it's absolutely heartbreaking to me that a friend of mine, a very close family friend of mine, she's called Suzanne, she has terminal cancer and she has signed up to Dignitas, and she's a wealthier woman. But the only reason she can do that is because of her financial position. And there are other people who have exactly the same condition as her, or perhaps even worse conditions than her, that actually won't have a good death. Some people don't have good deaths. I have seen people very close to me die, and some deaths just aren't good. And some people take that very difficult decision. It's not a decision which is taken lightly, that they want to end their life in a dignified way. And I think people should have the option to do that. No one's being forced into it. It's just giving people that option if that's something that they want to do.
And in terms of the implementation, when you hear the president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists and the BBC research that says GPs are split, is that problematic if it passes and becomes law in terms of implementing it?
Of course it's problematic, but if the law passes, we will have to find a way to implement it. And we talk about assisted dying as if we're trying to send a man to the moon. This is something which has been in process in other countries for absolutely decades, similar countries, and they've managed to figure it out. So it can't be beyond the wit of the British Parliament and the British medical system and the British people to implement a system of assisted dying that works for this country.
Sarah, will you definitely vote in favour of this the next time you have a chance to?
I think I'm very likely to. I agree with the principle. I think the situation as it stands is not fair to so many people who've got terminal illnesses who are facing really painful deaths. I'll definitely look at all the amendments. We don't know what amendments are going to be selected yet. So, you know, you want to make sure you look at the final thing and make a judgment based on that. But in principle, I really think that we need a change.
Mark, you talked about the bill needing to be revised dramatically, and if it came back as a government bill, would you consider voting for it?
Well, my own view is I don't support the principle.
Right. So you're so nothing's going to change.
But I think if you're going to do it, and if it is, you know, if Parliament decides it's going to do it, then it has to do it properly. Albie's point's right. Some countries have done this. But the problem is every country that's done it, it's then extended. It's gone further than expected. You know, in some countries it's been extended to children. Once you cross this Rubicon, there is no going back. And my concern is it's about balancing different groups of people. And, you know, you say no one's being forced to do it, but I've seen, when I was a constituency MP, families where I'm afraid the concern wasn't for the person who was vulnerable, it was they wanted to get their hands on the house. And I'm afraid you see subtle pressure gets put on people, and people start. Well, no, but that's the problem. Once you say you can do this, people then start feeling they want to end it so that people can have the resources, and you start changing how the health service. This assisted suicide bill fundamentally changes the principle of the NHS from a service that's about saving life to one that is part of ending life, and I think that's a really big step that people have to think very, very carefully about before.
Do you accept that it probably is going to go through on the basis of what we know? It went through fairly easily the first time.
Well, it did, but I mean, already I think The Guardian was reporting 5 Labour MPs that supported it have changed their minds. The Scottish vote was a lot closer than people thought it was. Many said they'd only support the principle, and the legislation needed a lot of change, so I genuinely don't know.
Though? I feel, to me, it almost seems pointless to put this legislation through if it's only 6 months at the end of someone's life. I don't really, you know, that time frame you could suffer through, really, couldn't you? But the people who are going to suffer for 10, 15 years, those are the ones I think we should be thinking about.
First of all, the terminal diagnosis thing I think is very difficult because anyone who has done any research into this knows that there's no precision about predicting how long someone's going to last. Many cases people last longer. But the fundamental thing about if someone has some massive challenges, when I did the disability brief, I met people who every day had to deal with huge challenges, and they had a real passion for living, and many disabled people think that what will happen is that it will just be easier, rather than putting effort into helping them live independent, full lives, it'll be easier to not do that and to not have them be here. And that's why not a single organisation representing disabled people supports this bill.
All right, well, thank you for all your contributions on this very serious issue. We're going to talk about something completely different. BBC News headline, Mayors make case for Liverpool to Manchester rail link. Yes, both of them, Steve Rotherham and Andy Burnham, have called on the government to commit £17 billion to building a new railway linking their two cities. Sarah, should the government commit to this plan?
Look, the Bears are doing exactly their job, which is advocating for their cities, and I completely understand that public transport and investment in it makes a big difference.
And are you in favour of it?
Luckily, I'm not the Chancellor, so I'm not going to be making the big spending decision live on air, but that's their job, right, to advocate for their cities and for the transport links.
Is it a good idea to have a new link between Liverpool and Manchester?
Yeah, I think having more trains across the whole country is obviously a great idea. The question is, you know, how much money is there, which is for the Chancellor to decide. But I think we're spending double the amount on public transport in the north than we are in the south of the country. In my area, in the Midlands, we really rely on buses, and the government's doing a really good job about introducing the bus services bill and just changing fundamentally the way that buses work. But we know how important transport is to communities, to the economy, and the government is definitely focused on improving it.
I mean, I think you were Transport Secretary at the time, Mark Harper, when the government made that major decision, that U-turn to scrap HS2's northern leg. Is this a better use of money?
Yes, it is. One of the reasons why Rishi Sunak and I made the decision to get rid of the second phase of HS2 was to take that £36 billion saving and actually put some of it into Northern Powerhouse Rail. So this Liverpool to Manchester scheme was one that we supported. The money was coming out of the savings from cancelling the second phase of HS2.
You didn't save it though, did you? You lost quite a lot of money buying up the land to put in put the tracks in.
No, that's
never
not true.
got
How much was it then?
We started the process of we started the process of selling that land.
But below what you bought it for.
No, I don't think that was correct.
No, it is.
And we said we'd save the money, £36 billion of savings, and I think we were supportive of this Liverpool to Manchester scheme. We'd started work on the route, and I think this is but joining together the big northern cities and effectively having another equivalent to London in the UK.
Lots of people thought you should have started in the north and coming down the other way. What did you make of that decision when Mark Harper was Transport Secretary, and is this a better use of money?
I think it was the single biggest mistake of the last Conservative government to cancel both legs of HS2 to both Leeds and Manchester, for a couple of reasons. When we talk about the route between Liverpool and Manchester, actually, part of that route was part of HS2, which went from Manchester Piccadilly to Manchester Airport and involves a very expensive tunnel through South Manchester. And the business case for that tunnel only really worked if you have high-speed 2 trains running through it, as well as the trains going between Manchester and Liverpool. Now, one of the key messages of the Boris Johnson administration was levelling up. How on earth can you level up without things like Northern Powerhouse Rail and HS2 that are going to be connecting the biggest cities of the North and the Midlands? It was probably the main manifestation of levelling up to, I think, a lot of people was HS2 going to Manchester and Leeds and Northern Powerhouse Rail, and now none of it seems to be happening. How long have we been talking about Northern Powerhouse Rail? When did George Osborne announce it? I think I was still at school. Nothing's happened.
You're so young.
That's just 'cause you're very
You're so young.
But Northern Powerhouse Rail, we agree. My view was getting Northern Powerhouse Rail delivered is actually more use to developing the North than that second phase of HS2.
Yeah.
Look, in government, you have to make choices about spending, right? There's not an infinite amount of money, so there was a choice to make, and our view was cancelling the second phase of HS2, still delivering it to Birmingham and the West Midlands, but delivering that join up across the North.
We've got to
was
stop
a better
pretending
use
that
of
Hang
money.
on, Mark,
It was a better
London
use
to
of
Birmingham, and it costs, what, £80 billion?
And it's at Old Oak Common for years as well. It's not even going to go into central London straight away.
I mean, was that a good use of public money?
Well, look, the decision was taken to do it, and you have to make a decision. Look, we made a decision based on what we had in front of us, and you have to make some choices about what you spend the resources on. And I think the cross the North option about developing the Northern Powerhouse Rail was a better use of the money.
You did London to Birmingham. Can we just...
Yes, no, but Northern Powerhouse Rail is not the same as...
That was a bad use of money.
Northern Powerhouse Rail is not the same as HS2.
No, but...
Joining up the northern cities, we said, and putting money into...
But why did it cost so much? Why did it cost so much money to build that line from London to Birmingham and then not get the rest of it in order to do the linking up that you're talking about?
Part of it was around the process of going through Parliament, and you have lots of people... part of the challenge about building things in Britain is lots of MPs then raise issues, and we had to put a very expensive...
You gave into your backbench MPs vested interest. You said, don't do it in our constituencies.
Vested interest. MPs representing their constituents, we had to spend a lot of money on tunnelling, and that drove up the cost.
When you did the initial plan
save Tory constituencies. I mean, Sarah, how on earth is Keir Starmer, admittedly with a pretty impressive majority, but shallow in many cases, he's going to come up against the same sort of opposition for all the sort of planning of infrastructure that this government wants to do? Mark Harper's government couldn't do it with HS2. How confident are you're going to be able to do it with house building?
I think we will, because we were elected on a platform to get Britain building, be that infrastructure or be that housing, and we've got to do it. We have a housing crisis in this country. We've got to solve it. We've got something like 20,000 families on the council housing waiting list in my area, so we've absolutely got to do it. And, you know, we did waste huge amounts of public money and years and years and years on HS2. It's a huge state failure. I think that's partly why the public don't trust politicians, because they don't believe we're going to get stuff done.
Do you think they'll be more successful at it, actually bulldozing through the planning process to build the infrastructure that they say is necessary?
I wonder if there's been a hyper-focus on the planning system rather than actually looking at the developers and forcing them to, say, build on land that they've already purchased or fulfil plans that they've already had signed off. Perhaps there should be sort of a fining system if developers hoard land or refuse to fulfil, there are many developers who've got around 10,000 homes in the pipeline but just haven't built them to completion.
Albie?
There is an issue with the planning system, isn't there? It does. There are all sorts of crazy outcomes as a result of great crested newts that lived there 30 years ago. We've got to build £100 million bat tunnel because some bats might fly through and get hit by a train. You know, there are some pretty crazy planning rules in this country that stop things from being built. I think in London, for example, you can't have a stone oven because of some rule that was brought in after the Great Fire of London.
Right.
You know, there are some ridiculous planning rules in this country that need to be reformed.
Well, do you want to defend the Great Bat Tunnel, Mark Harper? That came in while you were
interestingly,
in government.
part of that was driven by the European environment regulations, which, interestingly, this government isn't changing. And I believe I'm right in saying that the judgment was that you had to do that to comply with those rules. So, look, I think we should
You're
try and
testing
make
my knowledge slightly on that, yeah.
try and make it easier to build things. But it's actually more complicated because a lot of these rules are in place because people wanted to protect things and do different things, and a lot of this is about balancing. So look, getting things built is important. The London to Birmingham part of HS2 is absolutely under construction, doing great guns. And if you look at Birmingham, it's had a huge impact, positive impact
Could have
on
been the same for
economy
Manchester,
there.
Liverpool and Leeds.
Well, you have to make choices, Albie. There's not an infinite amount of money, and our view was Northern Powerhouse Rail was a better investment than the second phase of HS2. Not everyone will agree about that. That was a decision we made, and we'll now see what the present government's going to do.
Let's talk about levelling up. I hadn't heard that for a little while, actually. Albie, thank you for raising it. And in terms of rebalancing resources, this headline, BBC News doing very well. Apparently thousands of civil servant jobs to leave London, many of them going to cities in the north, and I think that comes against 12,000 jobs actually closing. In terms of making the state more effective, perhaps making it slightly smaller, is that it in terms of the government's plans?
No, I think we've said that there'll be more to come in the future, but it is an exciting announcement today about the fact we are going to get 12,000 civil service jobs and also good quality jobs, so not just entry-level jobs, jobs that you can really progress in out of London. I think we've said we want a civil service speaking all the accents of the UK, and I think it's great. And people in Birmingham will be excited about the opportunities, but also in Manchester and Aberdeen. So this is absolutely what we were elected to do.
Right, so this isn't about making the numbers of jobs smaller or bringing them down, it's just about spreading them.
I think we have said overall we want to reduce the size of the state, that we want to reduce the amount of civil servants, but this is about getting those jobs out of London, and also we're going to save something like £100 million on buildings in central London through this too.
I mean, Kemi Badenoch has said on a regular occasions she wants the state to do less. Do you agree with that?
I do, but I also support this move. This is continuing the work that we were doing in government. You know, when I was at the Department for Transport, we'd started hiring people. We had a lot of people based in Leeds, in Birmingham. I went and saw our team there. Actually getting people to be able to work across the whole country, really important for departments, particularly like transport, where you are, you know, doing things in the whole country, and where London
not that they could get to Leeds,
and where London is not typical of the rest of the country. You know, in the whole country apart from London, most people go to work in a car.
Yeah.
And you need people who work in the Department for Transport to remember that. It's the Department for Transport, not the Department for Trains.
Right, OK, so these jobs are being spread around the country, but in terms of the running costs that the government says it wants to reduce, and the Conservatives have said they want a smaller state, let's just have a look at civil servant numbers on this graph. There's quite a lot going on, but if you look towards the end on the right-hand side, the immediate headcount cap that was brought in by the last Conservative government, you can see even then the numbers continue to go up. Could you have done more to reduce the size of the state?
Yeah, well, I think we could, but I think I would just remind people that we did have to cope with a pandemic, which did drive an enormous amount of government spending and state activity, and we were then having to reverse some of that. So I do think you have to be fair and remember that. But you're right, the state should do less, but do what it does do better and more effectively. And if the government does things that help that, we'll support them.
Are you in favour of shrinking the state in this way?
Well, I think that the Conservatives attempted that in the Home Office, didn't they? And then there was there was over 100,000 people who were crossing the Channel every year. And because there weren't adequate numbers of civil servants to process those asylum claims, these people were kept in hotels for years. And actually, a lot of them are still there, and Labour are attempting to blitz through that backlog. So I'm not in favour of sort of the moral panic of reducing the state. I think, you know, if there are surplus jobs, fine, they go. But if you do what the Conservatives did and cut jobs that are needed, well, then the cost is just going to be laid on. There's a domino effect, isn't there?
Albie?
Look, I think when we talk about reducing the size of the state, it's very easy when people just say, oh, I want to reduce the size of the state.
And how do you do?
Let's do less with more. But if we actually look at the departments that have the biggest budgets, 12,000 jobs moving to Leeds or Liverpool or wherever is really not cutting the mustard. It's not doing anything at all. If we really want to talk seriously about reducing the size of the state, we need to look at NHS reform, we need to look at welfare and pensions reform. And whenever governments try to attack these issues, let's take the winter fuel allowance, for example, everyone gets very squeamish about it. And then the Conservatives who say, oh, actually, we're in favour of reducing the size of the state because we want to cut taxes. When we look at how we could reform those pensions and welfare benefits, Conservatives get annoyed about it. It doesn't make any sense. You can't be pro-reducing the size of the state, and then when the Labour government tries to reduce the size of the pensions bill or benefits going to pensioners, get squeamish about it.
Well, we did lots of things to reform that when we were in government about, the state pension age going up, doing lots of sensible reforms that have a massive long-term impact. But, if you're the government and the first thing you do, without having promised it in your manifesto, is take money away from almost every pensioner, 10 million pensioners, so not wealthy pensioners who are actually just above actually being able to make ends meet, I don't think that's the right choice.
Well,
how would you reduce the size of the state then?
Well, you have to make sensible decisions about, yes, you have to grow the economy, you have to make decisions about what the state does. I mean, for example, I don't think it's very sensible. I don't support, for example, the state deciding it wants to run every train service in the country. What we need is to grow the number of people using the rail network.
Yeah, but if it was,
not have
that's
the
a whole other
running
issue
it.
because the trains are way too expensive to use half of the time. And also, on reducing the size of the state, when you spoke about pensioners there, you kept the triple lock on pensioners, and that was at a time where we had about 11% inflation.
Yeah, should the government look at the triple lock again?
No, the government is absolutely committed to the triple lock. I think it was Kemi Badenoch who said that we needed to look again, and the Shadow Chancellor said it was unsustainable. So Labour is committed to the triple lock. But we are reforming the state. We've abolished NHS England, so we're going to be moving a lot of those jobs back.
We've also created quite a lot of other quangos. But yes, I'll give you are getting rid of NHS England. But in terms of what Albie is saying, the real reforms would have to come in welfare, which you're trying to do. You've tried to do something with the winter fuel payment, and you are opposed in every quarter pretty well from opposition parties and within the Labour Party.
I think there's a difference between reducing the bill for things and reducing the number of civil servants and the size of the state. And so that's what this is about with NHS England. But I think it's right where we have civil service jobs that are really good jobs, we should be moving them outside of London and giving people across the country opportunity.
All right, let's talk about the government's immigration white paper published on Monday. There's been a lot of focus on the language that was used by Keir Starmer in terms of proposals to cut net migration. But let's see what the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, had to say about international students.
International students bring huge benefits to the UK, supporting our world-leading universities and bringing in top talent and investment. But we will strengthen compliance requirements and checks to prevent visa misuse. On the issue around the international students levy, the white paper sets out that we will explore that levy, and that work is being led by the Education Secretary to ensure that we look at the way in which we can ensure that investment goes into supporting skills in the UK.
Well, let's get some reaction from Vivienne Stern, Chief Executive of Universities UK, which represents over 140 universities across the country. Hello to you, Vivienne. What was your reaction when you heard the government's proposals?
Well, I mean, I can't say that we were happy. I think the combined effect of the government's proposals will be to reduce the number of international students who come to the UK. And whilst there are some people who clearly think that that's desirable, I think it's a big mistake. I think the fact that the UK is an extremely attractive destination for international students is a colossal benefit, not just to universities, but to everyone in the UK. I mean, clearly they have an enormous beneficial economic impact. We think the value of international students coming to the UK is worth about 40 billion a year. And I think that's not to be sneezed at right now, given the kind of real quest for growth. And we've got a university sector that's distributed right across the country, which means I was in a hotel in Paisley a few weeks ago, and the person running that hotel, when I said I was going to visit the university, told me over the course of about 10 minutes how that university kept his business going, because it was the parents of international students coming to stay who filled his bedrooms. It's not just universities who need these students. We're all lucky to have them, and we should be much more appreciative of the fact we've got this enormous advantage.
Right, well, Sarah, be more appreciative, says Vivienne. It's a colossal benefit, the number of international students, and you're making a big mistake.
I think we do absolutely appreciate how important universities are to our country, to our economy, and the Home Secretary there was talking about the contribution of international students.
Sure.
So I think overall we need to support the university sector, which we're doing, and we know there has big financial issues overall. But
so
it's
why are
also
you cutting the number of international
striking a
students
balance
that
with the
bring all this?
immigration system overall? But I think the Universities UK did, I think, welcome the fact that we are protecting the 18-month timeline after people have left their university course to be able to get a job, because I think there had been some concern that it would be cut more than that. And I think they said that it would keep us competitive into the international environment. But we know our universities are really important to our global reputation, and we want to make sure that international students can still come here.
Right, they can still come here, but you want to reduce the numbers.
Look, overall, this week we were talking about the immigration system as a whole, right? Which is that we know that immigration has been really important to this country.
But you want to cut the
Also,
number of international students that are coming here.
we want to reduce the overall amount of immigration in the country, but we still want to make sure that we have a strong university sector and that we can have international students come, and that was the balance that the government was striking this week.
Now, I understand the balance, and I can see there are trade-offs, but just on the proposal, the direct consequence, rightly or wrongly, Vivian thinks wrongly, is that fewer international students can come here. That's right, isn't it?
So that is definitely part of what's been announced this week, but we still want to make sure that international students can come. It's obviously not saying that you can't come, and it's protecting the higher education sector. But we do also need to look overall about university finances, which I understand that this is related to, and which have been in a very difficult place for a long time, and which we need to work with the sector to fix.
Right, and we'll come on to that in a moment. Vivian, do you accept that?
Look, I think the point about the reduction in the amount of time that graduates can stay and work, which is going to be reduced by 6 months to 18 months, look, it could have been a lot worse. We had real concerns that the graduate route would be removed entirely, and I think that would have been, I mean, look, I try not to be, to exaggerate, but I think that for some institutions that would have been perceived as a bit disastrous. So there was some, I think the government did listen on that, and I think we should be grateful for that. I mean, look, there are some other measures, though, when you take them in the round, which I think are really unappealing. You talked about the financial pressure on universities. You know, people sort of sometimes say it's all universities' fault that they're in financial difficulty, but the amount of money we can charge UK students is capped by law, and it's been frozen for the best part, or actually give or take over a decade, and it's fallen in real value by about a third. That's true in all 4 nations of the UK for one reason or another. We needed the international student income to make up that shortfall. It costs about £20,000 a year to train a vet, and UK universities get about 10,000. So they've been pushed to be entrepreneurial, to try and find other ways to fund those high-cost subjects. And, you know, the proposal in the Immigration White Paper that the government will reduce international student numbers and then levy universities, put a tax on them for those that remain. I mean, that has sent us into a little bit of a tailspin, I've got to say. We're really, you know, not that impressed with the idea that you take a university sector that's under enormous financial challenge and then you tax it. That has gone down like what I would describe as a cup of cold sick.
Right. How do you respond to that, Ava, listening to Vivian?
I enjoyed the idea that £9,000 isn't good value for money. I mean, I was one of the, I think I was the second year of students or the first year of students where it went up to £9,000, and I really enjoy looking at my student loan, which is still at £53,000 and has interest added to it every single month. I mean, one thing I don't like about this conversation, I don't like Labour's rhetoric. I don't like the way that they've been speaking about immigration or foreign students, but I do think that we've got an over-reliance on them. And actually, I would love to see more domestic students being able to go to university. That was the initial plan that Tony Blair set out.
But still at the same level of fees?
But still at the same level of fees. You know, perhaps maybe there's a conversation here, why are universities mismanaging? But, you know, if you look over towards someone like America or Harvard University, well, not anymore, but that was heavily subsidised by the government. Perhaps there should be a conversation about subsidising domestic students.
Right. Should we be subsidising domestic students, taxpayers' money? And do you support the government's policies more broadly to reduce the number of international students coming here, Mark?
Well, look, two things. First of all, I think it's right that there are proper controls around people coming. It's right that people come here to our institutions, but they should definitely be coming to study, not using it as cover for doing something else. So some of that compliance work, some of that I did when I was Immigration Minister, that's very sensible. On the cost point, I strongly supported the move to fees because one of the things, conscious from a background like mine, a working class background, is in England, it's much easier to go to university if you come from a working class background than, for example, if you're in Scotland, where the numbers are capped because there aren't any fees. There is, of course, an argument about the fees and how you set up the loan system to pay for it, and there's some sensible conversations about that. But fundamentally, people who are graduates, it's still the case they'll earn more, and it's therefore fair, I think, that they have to pay the cost. No, that is true.
No,
it's not as big a it's not as big a rise as
it has changed.
The other thing is, I think it's really good that we provide other choices for people. I'm a massive supporter of apprenticeships, particularly degree apprenticeships, that give people more choices about going to university, having the employer help fund that. And I think the more choices that you give young people about how to maximise their potential for young people from all backgrounds is what we should be doing, not just focusing on going to university.
Which is a reform argument at the moment, actually. They're arguing that nurses should actually have a government subsidy. They should have a bursary in order to train at universities.
Well, effectively, we now have apprenticeships in the NHS. That was something that we introduced that the NHS hadn't done. I think having more apprenticeships for all the roles in our public services is an excellent idea to widen opportunity. And that will be a choice that some young people can do where they wouldn't want to go to university and have that fee and loan burden themselves.
I mean, is it time for a reform, Vivian, to address the over-reliance, clearly, of universities on income from international students?
Well, look, in short, there's a lot in that. Yes, this system has to change, and Universities UK, which is the organisation I lead, is currently working on a huge programme of work to support universities to change the way they do things, in some cases quite radically. And we've been putting out some information and insight into what's happening in the university sector, but it's the biggest transformation I've seen in the quarter of a century that I've worked in this sector. I would agree strongly that it's time for a better balance between the public contribution towards the costs of study and the private contribution. I think that could be achieved by maintaining the value of the current tuition fee in England in real terms, but boosting the contribution that the public makes. So not trying to wind it back and catch up for the third of value that we lost over the last decade, but boosting the public contribution so there's a better balance between the state, which benefits if people go to university and train to be nurses or paramedics or doctors. But also the individual, and the evidence is very clear to a very, very large degree, those people who get a university degree benefit in financial and in other terms. So there is an argument for a balance here.
All right, let me go back, Albie, to the 6% levy, which Vivian, as she said, it went down like a bowl of sick in terms of that being introduced. I mean, I don't quite understand how that will reduce the number of international students taxing the university or making them pay a levy on the income from international students.
Well, it would disincentivise universities from recruiting so heavily from international countries, and I think that is probably the idea behind that. But we've got to think, with all of these immigration reforms, why are we here? We are here because in the most recent year, we had nearly 1 million net migrants in 1 year. I think it was 906,000 was the official figure. The prior year, 750,000, something like that. Now, I think for every general election that I can remember in my lifetime, I think the British people, or the parties that the British people have voted for, have said they'd bring immigration down. David Cameron, who I supported, wanted to bring immigration down to the tens of thousands. Well, it's now in the hundreds of thousands, nearly in the millions, in fact. So there will be probably some pain when it comes to reducing immigration. And I think politicians need to be honest about that. But if politicians want to deliver on the will of the British people, and I think they should, otherwise Nigel Farage is going to be laughing all the way to number 10 in 2029, we have to deliver on reducing immigration, and that will mean painful decisions for some industries, and it might even mean some trouble for the university sector. But I think that is better than the British public feeling that they vote politicians in and then they don't do what they say they're going to do.
Vivian Stern, thank you very much for joining us today. And actually, we're going to stick with the subject of immigration since you've raised it, Albie, and hear what Prime Minister Keir Starmer's view broadly on immigration was in 2020.
We need to make the wider case on immigration. We welcome migrants. We don't scapegoat them. Low wages, poor housing, poor public services are not the fault of migrants and people who've come here. They're political failure. Political failure. So we have to make the case for the benefits of migration, the benefits of free movement. A one-nation experiment in open borders, conducted on a country that voted for control. Well, no more. Today, this Labour government is shutting down the lab. The experiment is over. We will deliver what you've asked for time and again, and we will take back control of our borders.
Well, that was Keir Starmer just earlier this week. What does the real Keir Starmer believe, Sarah?
I think in the rest of that speech on Monday, Keir Starmer talked about the important role that immigration has always played in this country. In my own area, we've had big immigration and they've worked in public services and done important jobs in the foundries and the factories. And he also celebrated the diversity of this country, while also saying that he thinks the level of immigration, and it's quadrupled since 2019. So since he's made that first speech you saw, we've had a quadrupling of the numbers. I think those two things can both be true.
Right.
We think immigration has played a positive role, but that maybe the way the system has been working...
He called it a lab experiment, broadly paraphrasing. He said it was a squalid period. That is nothing like the way he spoke about the benefits of immigration. He said it was political failure if people didn't appreciate the benefits of immigration in 2020. So which does he believe?
I think he said on Monday that immigration has always been part of this country. It always has, and it will continue to be. And immigrants make a really big contribution, and the diversity of this country is good. But that, in recent years, it has not been working. And that you've seen that from the public. They do not think the immigration system is working. And as the government, we were elected on a manifesto to do something about that. And that is what the speech was all about.
What did you make of the language? You mentioned it just before, the rhetoric that was used.
Well, it doesn't really matter what I think. I do know that a lot of Labour councillors have been texting me the past couple of days saying that it's all falling apart at local level and they don't want to be a part of the party, they don't want to canvass for the party, and they don't want to knock on doors and have to answer questions about immigration. It's very surprising to me that we can't have a sensible discussion about the number of people, the number of net migration that we have in this country without the vitriol of, that is very similar to the sort of thing that's been pumped out by the Reform Party or Kemi Badenoch is trying to chase also.
What was unsensible about what Keir Starmer said?
I think it's the tone. It's rather than talking sensibly about how Brexit has meant that we don't have the sort of even flow of workers coming in and out of the United Kingdom. Instead, there's this sort of almost invasion of people who are snatching jobs. That's the sort of the feel that it had to it. It really kind of gave me like sort of 2015 era style political rhetoric. I just don't understand why we can't talk about this sensibly. Why can we not just bring in sensible caps? Why can we not raise the amount that care workers are paid so that cheap, quote-unquote, labour isn't forced to come in through the back door and fill those gaps? It all just seems a bit sort of futile.
But at its core, the speech earlier on this week, he was talking about the fact that we need to have rules on immigration and we need to enforce them. That was the main message from the speech. I was reading the speech earlier on today. Yeah, but he said we're at risk of becoming an island of strangers if we don't follow the rules. That is what he said.
But is that
What's controversial?
Is that a Labour
What's controversial about
politician to
that?
you? Is that a Labour politician to
It's a
you?
sensible politician. I really don't understand what the outrage is about this speech.
Well,
People are comparing it to Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood
I will
speech.
tell you,
and they're nothing alike.
After Corbyn, Keir Starmer convinced people to campaign for him and put him in position as Prime Minister, and he hoodwinked a large swathes of the party into believing that he was going to carry out some kind of pseudo-Corbynism that he has not delivered. And then those people trusted him again and voted him into Parliament this time round last July, and yet again he has failed those people who have campaigned for him. So at some point we have to admit we don't know what.
But even Labour voters think immigration is too high.
Because he's a fair weather politician.
Do you think immigration is too high?
No. I've just said that at the beginning. I said I don't understand why we can't have a sensible conversation about immigration without the vitriol.
But I'm still not clear what was vitriolic about Keir Starmer's speech.
Talking about it being an island of strangers. This is not the Keir Starmer that he promised to
At
voters.
risk of, as Albie said, at risk of becoming an island of strangers. You served as Immigration Minister between 2012 and 2014 under David Cameron during the implementation of the hostile environment policies, as we used to discuss them. Your former boss, Theresa May, later admitted that approach was a mistake. Do you think Keir Starmer's at risk of making the same mistake?
Well, I think that clip you showed demonstrates why I don't think anyone's going to believe what he's saying now, because it's clearly not what he believes. He believes something completely different.
Or is it because you did allow the numbers to quadruple over a short period of time?
Look, when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, we clearly made some mistakes. I would just say quite a lot of those people, a big chunk of those people were Ukrainian refugees and people fleeing the communist Chinese.
Yeah, but hang on, when it went to 950,000 net migration...
A third of those were those people. But look,
yeah, but that may always happen. You may always want to have people here fleeing persecution.
We've accepted that, but we need to accept that we made some mistakes. We need to listen to what people said and put that right, which is why we've been setting out our approach. James Cleverly made some important changes when he was Home Secretary, which we've already seen are going to reduce migration by about 300,000. We've started to see that take account already. That's a much bigger change that we put in place than you're going to see from the white paper that was published on Monday.
I mean, do you accept that language alone does not bring down net migration figures when you're choosing both previous Conservative governments and this Labour government?
Hard work on policy. It's tough. You've got to make the detailed changes and then you've got to enforce them. That's hard work for the Home Office. You know, that's what the government's got to do.
I think it's time for Prime Minister's questions. Let's go into the chamber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number one.
Mr. Speaker, over the past week we've secured a historic trade deal with India and a landmark agreement with the United States, protecting and creating British jobs, slashing tariffs and driving economic growth. We've also published a white paper setting out how this government will end the open borders experiment of the party opposite, bringing net migration down, backing British workers and delivering fair control of our borders. Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will also want to mark the 40th anniversary of the Bradford City fire. We remember the victims of that devastating tragedy and celebrate the strength of the community. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 14 years of Conservative cuts have stripped the Environment Agency of the resources and the staff they need to properly deal with badly managed landfill sites, blighting communities like mine. The Jameson Road landfill site in my constituency of Blackpool North and Fleetwood has been producing toxic stenches for over a year now, causing nosebleeds, headaches, vomiting and breathing problems for my residents. Will the Prime Minister commit to ensure the Environment Agency have the staff and resources to police badly managed sites like this and across the country so they can act swiftly and effectively to protect communities like mine?
Mr. Speaker, I love the fact that when anyone says 14 years of a Conservative government, they'll go, oh no, that's how the country feels. Mr. Speaker, once again, a hard-working Labour MP clearing up the mess that was left behind. Our residents deserve far better. We expect rapid improvements. We're closely monitoring air quality and won't hesitate to take further action. She's right, we must tackle rogue operators who blight our communities. That's why we've boosted Environment Agency funding by £188 million, alongside tough new rules on incinerators and commercial fly tippers.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Bennett.
If I may, Mr. Speaker, Sir Roy Stone served 13 chief whips and prime ministers from Margaret Thatcher to Boris Johnson, and I'd like to pay tribute to his extraordinary service and send my best wishes to his family. And also, before we start, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say to the Prime Minister how horrified I was to hear about the attack on his family home. It is completely unacceptable. And I think I speak for the whole House when I say that this wasn't just an attack on him, but on all of us and on our democracy. Yesterday, we learned that unemployment is up 10% since the election. Why does the Prime Minister think unemployment is rising on his watch?
Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to Roy Stone as well and the service that was given us in various capacities. Can I thank her for her words about the attacks on me and my family and the kind messages from many others in the last few days. She did actually message me pretty well straight away, and I really do appreciate that. And she's absolutely right that this is an attack on all of us, on democracy and the values that we stand for. Mr. Speaker, she comes here every week to talk the country down. We've got 200,000 new jobs, record investment, 4 interest rates cut. Contrast that to the disastrous Liz Truss mini-budget, inflation through the roof, and a £22 billion black hole.
I'm not sure the Prime Minister even knew that unemployment was up, but there's no point him blaming everyone else. The fact is, Conservatives reduced the deficit every year until the pandemic, more than doubled the personal allowance. We left 4 million extra jobs, tackled the post-pandemic inflation spike, and left the fastest-growing economy in the G7. Let's talk about what is happening today. Let's look at Beales, a 180-year-old department store in Dorset. They survived 2 world wars and the winter of discontent, but they couldn't survive this Labour government. Beales is having, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, a Rachel Reeves closing down sale. What does the Prime Minister have to say to all the people who have lost their jobs?
Mr. Speaker, nobody wants to see job losses, but she must be the only person left in the country who thinks the economy was booming after the last government. We've created new jobs, record investment, trade deals that they tried. The India deal, I think they tried for 8 years and failed. We did that deal. They talked about a US deal. We did that deal. We tend to get a stronger relationship with the EU. The former trade minister must be the only former trade minister who's against all trade deals which boost our economy. She says she's against the India deal, even though it's got the same provisions she put on the table. She's against the US deal, even though it saves thousands of jobs in car manufacturing. And, Mr. Speaker, most absurdly, she says she's going to rip up the EU deal when she hasn't even seen what's on the page. They're reduced to a brain rot. A once great political party is sliding into brain-dead oblivion.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to welcome his tiny tariff deal, but the fact is, it has put us in a worse position than we were in March. He should not over-egg the pudding. Let's talk about how things are getting worse now. In every month of this year, household names like Sainsbury's, Tesco, Asda and Santander have cut staff. The ONS estimates that there are 100,000 fewer jobs than a year ago. And this was before his jobs tax, which will make things worse. Can the Prime Minister promise the House that by this time next year, unemployment will be lower than it is today?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think she just said a tiny tariff deal. Can I suggest that she gets the train to Solihull, 2 hours, goes to speak to the workforce at JLR, their families, and their communities, to tell them she would rip up the deal that protects their jobs. And when she's done that, she might travel across to Scunthorpe and tell the steelworkers there she's going to rip up the deal that saves their jobs. And then if she's got time, go up to Scotland and talk to the whisky distilleries. Tell them she'd rip up the deal that's creating 1,200 jobs for them, boosting their exports, and then come back here next week and tell us what reaction she got.
I didn't hear a promise to get unemployment down, and that's because he knows things are going to get worse. And this goes wider than businesses. Last week, I met staff and patients at Farley Hospice. They do fantastic work, but they need to find an additional £250,000 to pay the jobs tax. How does he suggest Farley Hospice, a charity which relies on donations, pays for his tax hike?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have provided £100 million boosting for the sector, and Children and Young Person Hospitals received £26 million funding this year. But, Mr. Speaker, she turns up every week to cart from the sidelines. But what she doesn't do, she moans about what we had to do in the budget to stabilise the economy. But she hasn't got the courage to stand there and say that she would reverse the next decisions that we take. And I know why. It's because she doesn't want to say she's against the £26 billion investment in our NHS. She doesn't want to say she's against the £1.2 billion more for our police. She doesn't want to say she's against the £3.2 billion more for our schools. All the time she doesn't have the courage of her convictions. It shows that her criticism is totally confected.
Mr. Speaker, I can't believe the Prime Minister is still using this figure. We had this very conversation at the dispatch box. He knows it is just capital spending. It's either he's not paying attention or he is saying things to disguise what is going on. That money will not pay for the jobs tax. He knows that, and the hospices know it too. And the other people who know that things are getting worse are the 5 leading business groups in the UK. They say that his so-called employment rights bill will be deeply damaging to growth. Does the Prime Minister accept that they are right, or does he believe that he knows better than business?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's the same old Tories. Every time better rights for workers are on the table, they vote against them. Respect and dignity and protection at work are good for workers, good for the economy and good for growth.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to listen to business. You cannot have employment rights without employment. Labour always forgets that it is not government that creates growth, it is business that creates growth. And businesses are closing, and they are blaming him and his Chancellor. There are 100,000 fewer jobs, Mr. Speaker. Hospices, charities, nurseries, they are facing bills from the jobs tax that they cannot afford. Even the unions say workers are being thrown on the scrap heap. And all of this before his unemployment bill makes hiring even more expensive. When will he admit that Labour isn't working?
Mr. Speaker, she says we should listen to She should listen to business.
I will have the last... Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she should listen to business. They're in favour of our trade deals. The India deal, fantastic deal. Tariffs on cars cut to 10%. Whiskey and gin, tariffs halved. £4.8 billion into our economy. What does she say she'd do with the India deal? She wants to rip it up. The US deal that saves thousands upon thousands of jobs. What does she want to do? She wants to rip it up. The EU deal, good for our economy. She's not going to even wait to see what it says. She absurdly says she's going to rip it up. It is so unserious. She even was reduced last week to calling the Indian government, accusing them of fake news. No wonder she did so badly as a Trade Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the project for them is over. They're sliding into oblivion. They're a dead party walking.
Rachel Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of British jobs have been safeguarded by this government's trade agreement with the US. Including those in my constituency who work for Jaguar Land Rover, like my next-door neighbour Ollie, proving that when Labour negotiates, workers win. Can the Prime Minister confirm to me that he will continue to stand up for all workers and our vital motor manufacturing industry as he negotiates a better deal for Britain around the world?
Well, can I pay tribute to her for her work with JLR, standing up for the jobs in her constituency? The deal that we've agreed saves thousands of jobs in our car industry, securing the livelihoods of countless families. And, Mr. Speaker, I've been up to JLR on a number of occasions, including last week. I know firsthand what it means for their workforce, for their families and for their communities. And the Leader of the Opposition says she would go and tell them she's going to rip it up. She should go up there. She says she's going to get against it. The Reform leader said, what did he say about JLR? He said JLR deserves to go bust. Shame on him. Labour are striking deals in the national interest.
The Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of my party, can I offer heartfelt congratulations to His Holiness, Pope Leo XIV? And can I offer our support to the Prime Minister and his family after the appalling arson attacks on his home? And can I echo his thanks to our brilliant police and firefighters? Mr. Speaker, 3 years ago, the previous government was faced with a choice. Their own Migration Advisory Committee told ministers that recruiting more care workers required improved conditions, career progression and better pay. But the Conservatives chose not to do that and instead brought in large numbers of care workers from overseas. Now, those carers looking after our loved ones in care homes should be thanked, not demonised. But will the Prime Minister do now the things the Conservatives refused to do, starting with a higher minimum wage for carers?
Prime Minister.
Can I first thank him for his comments about myself and my family? I do really appreciate it. It is important that we have fair pay for care workers, and that's why we've put in place our fair pay agreements. This is the first of its type. It will be applied first to care workers to ensure that they get fair pay, but also a better framework for progression. As he will know, most people leaving care work are leaving care work to go to the NHS because of the pay and the ability to progress. Our fair pay agreements will deal with that to make sure that in the future those jobs are more secure. And I would just add, Mr. Speaker, a declaration of interest. My sister is a care worker. I know firsthand how important the work is and how difficult sometimes the situation is facing them.
Shred Davey.
For that reply, it's a good first step, but we'll still be seeing people earning more in Amazon warehouses and supermarkets than care homes, and that will mean our loved ones going without the care that they need. But turning to the Middle East now, Mr. Speaker, for more than 10 weeks, Israeli forces have blocked food, water and medicine getting into Gaza. There is now a humanitarian catastrophe with 2 million people at risk of famine and 1 in 5 facing starvation. Rather than ending this crisis, the Netanyahu government is planning to seize all Gaza indefinitely. Now, I know the Prime Minister will agree that the blockade to Gaza should end, and I'm sure he would agree that it would be appalling if Netanyahu proceeds with that escalation. But will he act now and pick up the phone to President Trump for a joint plan to recognise Palestine and get food, water and medicine into Gaza?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising this because the situation in Gaza is simply intolerable and getting worse. And we are working with other leaders urgently to bring about rapid and unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza, which is desperately needed, obviously alongside the release of hostages, and to get back to a ceasefire, and that work is going on through my team 24/7. I do believe that is the initial action that needs to be taken, but I still fundamentally believe that however remote it may seem at the moment, the pathway to a two-state solution is the only way for settled and lasting peace in the Middle East, and we will continue with our allies to pursue that path.
What happened?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Found in my constituency, Durdle Door is one of the most iconic bathing sites in all the country. So last Friday, I was joined at Durdle Door by my honourable friends, the members for Bournemouth East, Bournemouth West, Poole, and most importantly, Ron, the local seal, to test the water quality at Durdle Door. Currently, water quality testing at bathing sites is only monitored from mid-May to September, which puts the health of all water users at risk who could be potentially swimming in pollution or sewage. With this in mind, will the Prime Minister work with me and my honourable friends to introduce all year round testing at popular bathing sites such as Durdle Door?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, everyone enjoying our beautiful beaches, lakes and rivers is entitled to know that the water is clean and safe. That's why we're modernising outdated bathing water regulations, including more regular monitoring sites to reflect local demand. And after years of failure by the party opposite, we're acting through our plan for change through new powers to tackle pollution, including banning bonuses, jail terms for law-breaking bosses and real-time monitors of every sewage outlet.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
This Prime Minister once spoke of compassion and dignity for migrants and for defending free movement. Now he talks of islands of strangers and taking back control. Somebody here has to call this out, Mr. Speaker. It seems the only principle he consistently defends is whichever he last heard in a focus group. So I ask him, is there any belief he holds which survives a week in Downing Street?
Yes, the belief that she talks rubbish. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I want to lead a country where we pull together and walk into the future as neighbours and as communities, not as strangers. and the loss of control of migration by the last government put all of that at risk. And that's why we're fixing the system based on principles of control, selection and fairness.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Council tax is the most regressive and unfair tax in this country. It has become a tax on deprivation. The less affluent an area, the more you pay. The greater your need, the more you pay. A Band D property in Westminster pays just £1,017 a year. In Hartlepool, it's £2,495 a year. For a Band H property, the difference between those two areas is £3,000. It is hammering people in towns like Hartlepool. Does the Prime Minister agree that this unfairness cannot continue, and will he commit to addressing this inequality once and for all?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. He's been a dedicated campaigner on this for a very long time. As he knows, 14 years of mismanagement by the party opposite left councils on their knees with a total failure to improve and update how councils are funded. Through £69 billion of funding this year and the upcoming multi-year settlement, the first in over a decade, will give councils far greater certainty and stability. Our detailed funding review will create a fairer system to make sure his constituents see strong, affordable local services.
Wendy Moore.
Mr. Speaker, while the Prime Minister prefers to take to the international stage, back here at home, Labour's Birmingham bin strike is now in its 10th week. Rubbish is still piled on the streets and recycling goes uncollected. And the reputation of the West Midlands is being trashed. His ministers continue to wash their hands of this. His mayor doesn't even want to talk about it. So will the Prime Minister come to the West Midlands and sort this out? Because at the moment, it's only the squeaky blinders that are winning.
Prime Minister.
Well, further evidence, Mr. Speaker, of the decline of the Tory party when they say that going to Ukraine at the weekend to try and secure peace for Ukraine and for Europe and the security and defence of Europe is somehow the wrong priority. That conflict has already massively impacted people in this country through the cost of living crisis and energy. Ukraine, Europe and we deserve peace and to live in peace. Mr. Speaker, on dealing with the bin strikes is the priority. We continue to call on Unite to suspend the strike immediately and bring the disruption to an end. We are supporting the Council to ramp up the cleaning operation and now collecting over 1,100 tonnes of waste every day and continue to offer our support so the backlog doesn't reappear.
Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I visited Sacred Heart Primary School in Hyndburn, where the excellent teachers expressed their frustration at the current SEND system. One wonderful boy who, despite being non-verbal and requiring personal support, has been waiting for over 18 months for an EHCP, and there is a risk now that he won't get a place in a school for the year ahead that suits his needs. How will the Prime Minister ensure that the voices of parents and children are at the heart of the SEND reforms that the government will bring forward?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. She's a powerful champion on this issue. Our principle is that every young person with special education needs should receive the right support to succeed. We've immediately announced an additional £1 billion for high needs funding, including almost £20 million for schools in Lancashire. We will support special schools and deliver truly inclusive places and expertise in mainstream schools to help every child thrive.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We at Reform, a party that is alive and kicking, very much enjoyed your speech on Monday. You seem to be learning a very great deal from us. But can I encourage you, please, to go further as a matter of national security? As a matter of national security. Over the weekend, an illegal immigrant from Iran, who we believe came by boat, was arrested in the north of England on serious charges of terrorism. Since the speech on Monday, 1,000 young, undocumented young males have crossed the English Channel. Does the Prime Minister agree? Now is the time to declare the situation in the English Channel as a national security emergency.
It wasn't my speech, it was the Prime Minister's.
Mr. Speaker, the situation is serious. The last government lost control of the borders. We are taking powers. The Borders Bill, precisely to his point, the Borders Bill is the first bill to give terrorism-like powers to law enforcement, precisely so that we can get in before the crimes are committed, before people get to this country. That's right. This is the most far-reaching provision ever for law enforcement to defend and secure our borders. And that's why it is extraordinary that he, of all people, voted against it. And sooner or later he's going to have to explain it.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since my election, I've been championing and backing our country's plumbers, builders, electricians and all trades. These are not the people just building Britain, but holding all of our communities together. That's why I've been campaigning for tougher sentencing and action on tool theft, and for the real cost of this crime to be recognised. I want to firstly thank everyone in the sector who's backed the campaign, because together we've shown that the message is clear. 14 years of government neglect. It's time for action and change. Will the Prime Minister work with me, the Secretary of State for Justice, and myself to include my bill as we review sentencing and justice so the punishment finally fits this crime?
Can I commend my honourable friend? She's led the campaign to highlight the devastating impact of these crimes. Mr. Speaker, for hard-working small businesses, the theft of tools isn't just a violation. It can mean thousands of pounds of potential work lost, with a huge impact to businesses and to families. We're investing over £1.2 billion extra into policing, with 13,000 new neighbourhood police to focus on crimes that impact on communities the most. And I pay tribute to my honourable friend, and I know the Justice Secretary will look at the details carefully.
Andrew Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Whether you agree with the Prime Minister's net zero targets or not, I'm sure the Prime Minister will agree that you won't achieve them, or he won't achieve them, without taking people with him. The cabling corridor, substation corridor for the Morgan and Morecambe offshore wind farm is now one of the most objected to national energy infrastructure projects in the country. And what is angering myself and thousands of others is that there is a perfectly alternative cabling route further up the coastline, which would actually have local economic benefit, would be more cost-effective as a whole life cycle project, and could connect to existing national grid infrastructure. But no one is listening. So will the Prime Minister now listen and pause the planning inquiry for the existing application and ask the Department to consider and cost the alternative route to avoid untold devastation to our coastline and countryside?
Can I thank him for his question? As he will know, the Secretary of State is going through a quasi-judicial exercise, and therefore I'm limited in what I can say, but let me do the best I can within those constraints, because the project is going through its examination, where interested parties can put forward their views on the application and should do so. And more broadly, as we drive forward renewable projects, the planning process is designed to ensure impacts are carefully considered. Thank you.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The United Kingdom has rightly helped arm Ukraine with modern, effective capability, and we're sending them some £4.5 billion this year. But after decades of relying on the peace dividend, our own forces are ill-equipped for modern warfare. With colleagues interested in defence technology, I'm developing a proposal for a joint UK-Ukraine production hub on British soil. This would support Ukraine while also modernising our own forces at warfighting scale and creating the jobs and know-how needed to rearm and stay secure. Will the Prime Minister use his good offices to help support this proposal?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable and gallant friend is right that our ironclad support for Ukraine should go hand in hand with firing up our own defence industries. And that means well-paid, secure jobs right across the country, including in Plymouth, and strengthening national security. We reiterated our support for Ukraine in Kyiv last weekend, and I'm proud that British industries are playing their part supporting Ukraine against Russia's illegal invasion. I'll make sure that he meets the relevant minister to discuss his proposal.
John Long.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People in the real world are disgusted by the Energy Secretary's obsessive pursuit of net zero at any cost. The Scottish Borders is under attack, with solar farms the size of towns, massive wind farms, and now mega pylons scarring unspoilt landscapes. Nobody sensible supports his crazed crank policies that will put jobs at risk and rip up farmland. So when will the Prime Minister step in and stop his Energy Secretary throwing taxpayers' money at this nonsense?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, only a few years ago, dealing with the climate challenge was a shared endeavour across this House. And it's yet further evidence of how far his party has fallen, that they cannot see the significance and importance of tackling one of the major challenges of our time. I think we should rise to that challenge, not be defeatist about it. And it's further evidence, as far as I can see, that the Tory project is just finished.
Jake Richards. Mr. Speaker, male suicide is a tragic epidemic in our country. Each week, almost 100 men take their own lives, and suicide is the biggest killer of men aged under 50. In my constituency, I'm working with Andy's Man Club in Maltby, the learning community in Dinnington, and Better Today in Kiverton Park to try and raise awareness about the fantastic groups who offer support for men in the most difficult circumstances. Will the Prime Minister use this opportunity to support the campaign that we are undertaking in my constituency, and also reassure those groups and my constituents that mental health services for men will be a priority for his government?
Can I thank him for raising this crucial issue? And across the House, I know members will have their own personal and tragic experiences of suicide. Mr. Speaker, we've launched a call for evidence on our men's health strategy, which will improve men's health in all parts of the country, including tackling devastatingly high suicide rates. We're also investing £26 million in new mental health crisis centres, funding talking therapies for 380,000 more people and recruiting 8,500 more mental health workers.
Bobby Dean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The plans to upgrade St Helier Hospital, including the delivery of a new specialist emergency care building, have been put back by 10 years. Now, I'm talking with the Trust about a way to bring all or part of those plans forward, but in the meantime, they have a very real fear that some of the buildings on the existing estate are at risk of catastrophic failure before the decade is out. So can the government reassure me that they'll work with the local trust on a plan to maintain and adapt the existing estate to ensure that St Helier Hospital can survive all the way through to the major works being complete?
The honourable member's constituents have been badly let down by the previous government's empty promises, which we're never going to deliver. We put the new hospitals programme on a sustainable financial footing, increasing the NHS capital budget to record levels so we can address the backlog of critical maintenance, repairs and upgrades. And I'll make sure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss the particular case.
Melanie Neal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes is the renewable energy capital of England, delivering homegrown, secure energy and boosting local skills. And over 12,000 people are employed in a clean energy job in Greater Lincolnshire. But these jobs are now under threat from Reform's new mayor, who has declared war on renewables, putting livelihoods at risk. What steps will the Prime Minister take to protect jobs by supporting the supply chain and delivery of renewable projects?
Mr. Speaker, she's a superb champion for energy security, driving down bills and the good secure jobs that renewables offer. And the parties opposite are climate defeatists. Anti-jobs, anti-growth, anti-business and anti-investment. And they should go and peddle their policies to the tens of thousands of people, working people in this country, working in renewables every single day. They don't think that Britain has the skills and they would deny us incredible opportunities. We're focused on securing billions in investment, creating tens of thousands of jobs and taking us off the roller coaster of an international fossil fuels.
Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A constituent of mine, Victor Franklin, was made severely disabled after a savage dog attack left him with multiple amputations. Will the Prime Minister explain why pensioners like Victor, who become severely disabled after retirement, are excluded from claiming personal independence payments and are instead limited to the lesser support of attendance allowance? And will he commit to reviewing this unfair rule?
Prime Minister.
Can I extend my thoughts to Victor and the awful circumstances that she describes must be extremely challenging. We do have to reform the system that we've got. It's not working. I think there's a general agreement about that, but the principles have to be clear, that we protect and secure those that need that protection and security. We help those who can work into work, and those who can work should work. But we have to reform the system that we've got to make it a better system, because what we've got doesn't work.
Nigel Cuttisker.
Mr. Speaker. Every week I meet families in Barking and Dagenham who tell me that they worry about paying for their bills because they are on a 0-hour contract. My constituents want the chance to work hard in a secure job, earn a decent wage and to have dignity in their workplace. As Labour plans for change delivers the biggest uplift in workers' rights in a generation, does the Prime Minister agree with me that Reform MPs working and voting against our employment rights bill show that they are no friend of workers in this country?
She's absolutely right. Let's be clear what the parties opposite voted against. Stronger statutory sick pay, they voted against. The right to guaranteed hours, they voted against. Protection from unfair dismissal, they voted against. Stronger protection for pregnant mothers, they voted against. Insecure work, a package worth £600 to the poorest workers, they voted against. Mr. Speaker, we're backing British workers. They vote against them at every turn.
Adam Dance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maternity services in Yeovil are due to shut on Monday after a deeply flawed CQC inspection in January and be moved to Musgrove Park Hospital in Taunton, which does not have the capacity for an extra 1,300 births a year. While the closure is initially for 6 months, I've received no guarantee it will open again. This creates huge fear. Will the Prime Minister or relative minister agree to meet with me and colleagues in the South West to stop this decision?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to him for raising this issue, which must be of concern. I'm not across the details of it, I'm afraid, at this stage, but I will make sure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to get to the bottom of the issue that he's described.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
It does indeed. That is the end of this week's session in the Chamber, as announced by Lindsay Hall, the Speaker there. Let me introduce our guest for this part of Politics Live. For the Government, Treasury Minister James Murray, and his shadow, in fact, Gareth Davis, for the Conservatives, and the BBC's Chief Political Correspondent Henry Zeffman. Well, it was quite a lively, punchy exchange between Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch, and I should say at the beginning, both she and the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, when he asked his questions, passed on their best wishes and concerns because, of course, there have been these arson attacks on the Prime Minister's private residence and another property linked to him. And he duly thanked Kemi Badenoch before, within seconds, moving on to saying that actually she should stop talking down the country. So we were back to business. First of all, on the language, what did you make of some of the lines that were coming out today from the Prime Minister?
Yeah, quite punchy, rhetorically. I mean, obviously, Keir Starmer's been doing Prime Minister's questions on one side of the House or another for 5 years now, but it does feel 10 months into his stint answering the questions that he is more confident, I think, than we've seen him for some time. I mean, I think the moment where he said Kemi Badenoch was leading the Conservatives into brain-dead oblivion, the moment where, and this was probably an ad-lib, he said to the Plaid leader in Westminster, Liz Saville-Roberts, that she was talking rubbish. He talked about reform peddling certain policies. I think it did display a certain confidence on the part of the Prime Minister. And I think there is that funny thing where a lot of Labour people I speak to are very anxious about the political climate more generally and the threat they might face from reform. But of course, in the House of Commons, there's only 5 Reform MPs, and Keir Starmer, I think, has a much more comfortable environment there with the backing of hundreds of Labour MPs behind him.
Well, and I suppose it is always good for morale on both sides in that sense. But on the substance, Kemi Badenoch focused her questions mainly on the jobs tax, as she calls it, the hike in national insurance contributions on employers announced by the government. Unemployment has ticked up, and she said that he is literally destroying the conditions for both growth and for businesses taking on more people. Is it beginning to hurt that?
I think it's certainly the most significant decision, actually, of all the decisions that the Prime Minister has made in government. And that goes for both sides of the argument, because you can say, if you're Keir Starmer, as he did to Kemi Badenoch, well, yes, that tax has raised money to invest in the NHS, to invest in police, invest in schools. And you can say, if you're Kemi Badenoch, well, hang on a second, look at what it's done more broadly to the economy. So I think, for all there are many interesting areas of dispute between the main two parties that we'll come on to later in this programme, I think the core dispute between the two parties at the moment is on the handling of the economy, and that was the big decision in terms of revenue raising, compared to, say, winter fuel, which is political but doesn't necessarily raise that money, that this government made early on. And I think that's where the kind of battle line in terms of the political economy is.
James, do you want to just put on the record, it is costing jobs. I mean, the Bank of England has said it will have an impact. It is having an impact. It's feeding into the real economy. That is the cost of the jobs tax.
Well, let's be clear what the Bank of England has said. The Bank of England has said the impact has been fairly small.
Yeah, but it has had an impact. You put it on the record, there's been an impact. It has cost jobs.
And when we first announced this decision, which we recognise as a big, tough decision for government and a tough decision for businesses to have to respond to, we acknowledged it was going to have impacts. But we were really clear why we've done it. And the reason we've done it is to fix the hole in the public finances, to get public services back on their feet. And if you look at money going into the NHS, we've now had NHS waiting lists falling 6 months in a row. And that is the right thing to do, both for people in Britain and for businesses who need a healthy workforce.
But what about growth? That was your core mission. I accept that the money has gone or is going into the NHS, and I'll come on to that in a moment with Gareth Davies. But on growth, how can that be a policy that sits easily with a core mission of growth? Businesses recruit people, they invest, they grow the economy. And you've done something to stop them.
Well, when you look at the growth projections, look at what the Office of Budget Responsibility says. Don't take my word for it. Look at what they say, and they look at all of the decisions the government makes in the round.
I think they cut the forecast,
and they've got the economy growing from 2026 in every year of this Parliament onward, and they've also revised upward the growth because of the decisions that we've taken. So the big planning reforms that we've taken, the planning reforms, the kind that the Conservatives talked about for many years, we've now put in place. And the OBR said these are the real deal. These are really going to get more homes built, which is obviously good for people looking for somewhere to live, but it's also good for the economy. Increasing GDP by £6.8 billion is making a real difference to people's lives.
I mean, Gareth Davies, the truth is the Conservatives under Kemi Badenoch, you want the billions of pounds pledged to the NHS, but you don't know how to pay for it.
I wouldn't say that, actually. I think if you look at our
you're not going to reverse this, are you?
Well, if you look at our record, we had record investment going into the NHS. The issue of the NHS isn't necessarily just about money, and I think most people who work in the NHS would see that. It is also about reform. But just in terms of
you do support the £22 billion going into the NHS, which is paid for by this hike in national insurance contributions.
I dispute that, actually. We want to see more investment into the NHS, but we also want to see reform. On this matter about the national insurance tax hike, just to put it in context and give some figures for your viewers, in April alone, 33,000 people, according to the ONS, lost their jobs. People are out of work and they know who put them out of work. And it's because of this national insurance tax rise, in the context of other things going up, increased regulation with the Employment Rights Bill, living wage going up. It's a potent combination of cost on business, which is impacting jobs. And that is going to be detrimentally awful for our economy going forward. And that's why growth was downgraded from our March budget last year because of the actions of the autumn budget. And I don't know what they're going to do about this, because it is really bad in constituencies across the country.
I think there's a really important part of the context that Gareth is missing here, which is that we're in a world where there is instability around the world, and actually what we are doing as a government is providing that stability for people and for businesses. So if you look at the trade deals which we've struck in India and the US, if you look at the work we're doing with the EU, if you look at the cap that we put on corporation tax, if you look at the help we're giving to small businesses to protect them from employer national insurance changes, this all provides stability for businesses so they can invest and grow. And actually, in an unstable world, that's more important than ever.
Gareth?
Look, he's right. It is a very unstable world. It's a very dangerous world. There are global risks. We face a global pandemic and a war in Ukraine in our terms. So absolutely, I agree with James on that. And your job when you're running a G7 economy is to make sure that there is enough slack in the system, that you are managing the economy to factor in global shocks. What this government have done, have overextended themselves. We've got a Chancellor who says she's not going to increase taxes again, which I don't think anybody believes.
Well, yeah.
She's increased spending by 70 billion a year, debt is higher, debt interest is higher, we've got inflation that's higher, and interest rates that, while they are starting to be cut, they're higher for longer. And so we are overexposed to those global factors, and I think that is negligent.
But actually, if you look at what the Bank of England has done, cutting interest rates 4 times since we came in, that is as a result of the stability which we brought back to the economy. And Gareth mentioned what the Chancellor has said, and the Chancellor has been very clear in opposition and right through her time in office so far that the fiscal rules are non-negotiable. Now, fiscal rules are not just a nice to have, they're essential to provide that stability in the economy and in the public finances, because we saw what happened when you have fiscal irresponsibility and the damage that causes to people's livelihoods.
Right, which companies, major companies, are backing and are behind your employment rights bill?
Well, I know that a lot of companies who I speak to say that they want to see their workers be more secure and productive. We know that having workers who feel greater security, who have decent pay and decent experience at work, are more productive for the economy. And actually, if I could just take this back to the earlier point we were talking about as well, we talked about investment in the NHS. Investment in the NHS is obviously important for people who need healthcare, but it's also important for businesses to make sure that people who have either physical or mental ill health can get healthy again and get back into work.
But it's interesting because I've spoken to a couple of people in the cabinet actually, and no one seems to be able to give me a list of names of major companies who said, yes, we want that employment rights bill.
Well, certainly when I talk to businesses understand where we're coming from on this, and they understand that actually the balance that we've inherited is not in the right place. We need to make sure that individual people have greater security at work. Businesses want us to work with them as we implement these changes, which is what we're doing, and they want to make sure that people are productive, and that's what we're doing in terms of strengthening both people's rights and also things like increasing the national living wage, which we've done.
But you can't name any. No one seems to be able to name any, even a small one, perhaps in their constituency, which is curious, let me put it that way. But on the NIC hike, why won't Kemi Badenoch commit to reversing it?
Because we're fiscally responsible, we're several years away from a general election, we think. We don't know, but we presume we're about 3 or 4 years away from a general election. We don't know the state of the economy that we're going to inherit, and so we're not going to be making huge pledges at this stage. But if you just look at our record, while I was in the Treasury, we cut national insurance twice. We believe it is a jobs tax. Rachel Reeves has called it a jobs tax. And if you genuinely want growth, you've got to get that tax down. This government are increasing it by 40 billion.
Well, you say you won't make pledges, but you've pledged to reinstate the tax break for private schools. So you are making some pledges around.
And the family farm tax, which is decimating farms across the country. But those are very small amounts of money, which begs the question why you did it in the first place. But on national insurance, this is a tens of billions.
The £1.7 billion from VAT on private schools helps us support what we're doing in schools more widely, putting more money into special educational needs. I think it's really important to take those decisions to support our public services.
I don't think anybody believes that's where it's going, but I'm afraid 1.7 billion is a drop in the ocean compared to the national insurance tax hike that you've imposed. And while we would want to see that come down, we're not in a position 4 years out to make
all right.
those
Well, let's talk about tariffs, because Kemi Badenoch called the tariff deal, the tariff agreement made with the United States, a tiny tariff deal. Keir Starmer says you just don't believe in free trade deals. Is that what it is?
Well, I heard him say that. We implemented a series of trade deals. We are absolutely pro-trade.
But they were also quite tiny, weren't they?
What she was pointing out is the fact that we're in a worse situation with the United States than we were under our government. We still have significant tariffs with the United States. We want a good deal with the United States. We were negotiating a very good deal with Donald Trump in his first term. We support any agreement that reduces tariffs. Of course we do. We just think they could do a better deal. When they negotiate, Britain loses, as we know from a series of events.
Yes.
Look, you have to take the world as it is, not as you wish it might be or you hope it would be. You have to take the world as it is.
It's a tiny tariff.
Well, the truth is that there were global tariffs imposed on all countries around the world. And because of the approach that Keir Starmer took, going out there to Washington, making an agreement with President Trump that we'd work on this deal, getting that deal across the line through a cool-headed approach, that's why we're in a position now. And frankly, Gareth says that they want to support trade deals, but as soon as we announce a trade deal with India, they come out and attack it. As soon as we announce a US trade deal, they oppose it. We're trying to improve our long-term relationship with the EU. They're opposing that. I mean, what do they stand for anymore?
Well,
Well, look at our record. We signed a series of trade deals. We're pro-trade.
Careful what you wish for.
We just think we could be a better negotiator. Keir Starmer is not a strong guy, as we know. He's not a tough guy. He's not a tough negotiator. He's getting bad deals for the UK.
Deals with India and US across
how
the line.
punchy he is at PMQs, I'm not sure anybody would say he's a tough guy.
His calm, pragmatic approach has got these trade deals across the line, and I think everyone recognises that is in our.
Well, let's talk about a different story. This headline here: migrants already in UK face longer wait for permanent settlement. Yes, according to Henry Zeffman, the government is preparing to apply new rules, making migrants wait longer for permanent settlement in the UK to those who are already in the country. Tell us more.
So, Joe, some people remember from Monday when the Prime Minister unveiled the Immigration White Paper that one of the many announcements actually within that was that for future migrants to the UK, the typical waiting period before you can apply for settlement, permanent settlement, and then eventually perhaps citizenship would double from 5 years as it is at the moment to 10 years. What some people asked and couldn't get an answer to on Monday was whether that applied to immigrants who are already in the UK and might in the coming months or years want to apply on that 5-year basis. Well, I've got the answer, and the answer is yes, it will apply to those people who are already in the UK. That hasn't been formally confirmed by the government, but it will be when they publish the full consultation document in the coming weeks. And on that consultation point, I just stress this will be subject to public consultation, so there's a chance, of course, that the government will change its mind. But I think even considering it, strongly considering it, intending to do it, as I understand they are, I think will prove quite controversial, with some Labour MPs who've already been saying, well, hang on, this is really uncertain for some people who've already come here, and the government appears to be changing the goalposts for them, even though they've come to the UK on a certain basis.
Well, one of those who may be affected is Issa Hekmat. Welcome to you. You moved to the UK with your wife 3 years ago from Iran, and you live in London and work as software engineers. Tell us your story broadly and what your reaction was to hearing this.
Honestly, if I want to share my story, we had these similar situations back in our country several times, that you wake up in the morning and you see that your whole hopes, your whole dreams, all of the dreams and plans that you have for the life, it's just vanished in the thin air. And now, and then after that, we decided to, enough is enough. We need to migrate from this country, Iran. And we came here with some promise. And to have a stable life here, to have some sort of stability in a trustworthy world. And yesterday, my reaction to this announcement was that it was the wrong place. It wasn't a trustworthy country, that they can keep their words, that when we came here, we came with some sort of, okay, you can get your settlement in 5 years. And now they're extending it. What if the government changed these rules in 2 years, 3 years? Or when we reach the point that we want to get our settlement, what is the trust between migrants and the government here?
Well, James, you're a minister in that government preparing to make a decision, or at least a proposal to be consulted on. You're no longer trustworthy.
I think the broader point is that trust in the immigration system as a whole has been severely damaged and in many cases broken. And that's what we need to fix. I think people across the UK don't trust the immigration system at the moment. They think it doesn't work. They think it's open to, and in some cases appears almost designed to be abused. And people want an immigration system that they can trust and they can have confidence in, so that we can get immigration numbers down, so that we can make sure that we invest in skills for people in the UK, and crucially that we can then make sure we're supporting people to integrate into the UK as part of
But Issa's already here. How's it going to deter Issa and his wife? They're here.
Well, I don't want to talk too much about a specific case. You'll understand. I don't think that's right for me to talk about a specific case. But let me talk generally about the principles that you've raised, which is that what we're saying is that in order to be able to apply for citizenship, the default would be after 10 years. If people are making a particular contribution to society, there will be options to reduce that to 5 years. All the details around that will be set out. But it is the overarching point here, and as I say, I don't want to talk about individual cases because it's not right for me not knowing all of the details. But the overarching point here is we have to have an immigration system that we can trust again, that gets migration down, that focuses on integration, and that focuses on skills amongst the homegrown workforce.
Issa?
Yes, we can talk about the policy and the effect of it on the people's lives. But one thing that I want to ask you is that how effective this policy could be, this extending the settlement. And in my story, I'm working with a giant tech company, and almost we have a team of 20 people in just one of our teams, and we have just 2 British people in the team. And I'm sure that if you extend this time, I have enough privilege. I had enough privilege to have other options, to have other choices, to go somewhere else, to go to the US, to France, other countries that are more trustworthy in their terms. And I probably consider that. And I'm sure that lots of people from our team are considering that. And the thing that happened is that we already have some positions in our team that we cannot fill. The consequence of that is that the team will be closed completely in the UK because it's a UK branch of a US company.
Right.
And they will move all of these investments back to the US.
You're going to lose, people like Issa and colleagues lose the tax revenue. You know, it's going to be a bad decision, isn't it, economically?
Well, there's still a focus within what we've put out yesterday in the immigration white paper about attracting high talent people to come to the UK and help grow the economy. But can I just say one broader point of context around what you said, which was really important to hear, which is that the Prime Minister also spoke about valuing migration and the contribution it's made to our country and the importance of making sure that we have people coming from around the world to help grow the economy and support our society. What he was also really clear about, though, is that the current immigration system is broken, is not trusted, is not working, is letting people down, and that's why we have to fix it.
Gareth, are you in favour of this policy?
Well, look, let me first of all say, I don't know your personal circumstances, but I'm very sorry to hear that you and your wife have been caused unexpected stress by this. But let me just point out that, it's great that you want to come to Britain and you've wanted to stay here. It is a great country. I love this country and I don't blame you for wanting to stay here. But we have a situation in our country where we have 9 million British citizens who are not actively contributing to our economy. They're not working in our businesses and across the country, and we want them to be doing more. We want them in employment, and that's why the Conservatives did set out a policy to increase the time frame of indefinite leave to remain, which Labour, it looks like, have now adopted. But it needs to be done so as part of a general package to reduce overall mass immigration, which we've become too reliant upon. That's why we need, in our view, a legal cap that's decided by Parliament and other measures.
Yes, although you haven't actually announced what that cap would be. I mean, Issa, why do you think, why can't British citizens do your job and the jobs of your colleagues?
I don't know, honestly, and I don't think that this is the way to put the people in those high-paying jobs. This is the way to vanish those jobs. This is the way to get rid of all of those investments from the big companies that are able to pay that amount of money. I don't think that this policy is going to cause the British people can fill those jobs. We already have lots of positions that we cannot fulfill. We cannot fill with the people. We try hard to even relocate people from other countries, and it's now getting more expensive, more harder to get people and convincing people to come.
Well, Issa Hekmat, thank you for telling us your story in response to what Henry Zeffman has told us. What is the sort of timescale? Just remind me of the proposals.
Well, so the proposal is that the proposals will be contained in a consultation, which we're told we'll get in the coming weeks, which obviously in government could mean months. But then after that, it would have to become, I think, legislation, various of these proposals. But I think, the reality is this is the government trying to stop large numbers of the people who came here as part of the immigration surge, which happened under the previous government in the years sort of 2020 to 2024. The government would rather a lot of them don't stay here permanently. That's fundamentally what's happening here. Although, I mean, one thing I should just stress in relation to Issa's case, and obviously I don't know the specifics, but what the government is trying to do here really actually is, I think, address the lower paid end of the sort of immigration labour market.
And that's probably not Issa Hekmat or other.
No, probably not. But I think what this illustrates is that the government, in trying to address a particular problem, perhaps inevitably, perhaps not, will have caused unease much more broadly.
Right. Well, thank you very much for coming into the studio. And, of course, thank you to all of my guests for joining me today. And that's all we have time for. But I will be back with more Politics Live tomorrow at 12:15 here on BBC Two and the iPlayer. Have a very good afternoon. Bye-bye.